Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sound of the alarm clock pierced through Robert's consciousness like a knife. He bolted upright, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest as if he'd just run a marathon. The familiar glow of the digital display on the bedside table read 6:30 a.m., just as it had for what felt like the 100th time. He blinked, trying to shake off the remnants of the nightmare. No, not a nightmare, but a memory of his death. Again, this was the 6th time this week, or was it the 7th? It didn't matter. The result was always the same. He'd wake up in his bed, the sheets tangled around him, with the same sense of dread gnawing at the edges of his mind. No matter what he did, no matter how he tried to change the course of events, it all ended the same way. Death. And then, the inevitable reset. He reached for his phone, scrolling through messages that he had read 100 times before. Every detail, every conversation was etched into his memory. He had tried to alter them, to say different things, to take different routes to work, but nothing mattered. The day played out the same way, like some cosmic joke that he was the punchline to. As Robert went through the motions of his morning routine, a creeping sense of hopelessness began to take root. The cycle had started innocuously enough, a slight déjà vu here, a repeated encounter there. He had brushed them off as tricks of the mind, the brain's way of filtering through mundane experiences. But as the days turned into weeks, the pattern became undeniable. The first time he died, it had been an accident. A car ran a red light, slamming into his vehicle at an intersection. The impact was sudden, brutal, and final. But the moment his life was snuffed out, he was thrust back to that same morning, waking up to the blaring of his alarm clock. The terror of that realization had paralyzed him, and he spent the day in a daze, trying to convince himself it had all been a dream, but it wasn't. The next day, he tried to avoid the intersection. He walked to work instead, carefully timing his steps to avoid any possible danger. It didn't matter. A freak accident, a falling construction beam, ended his life just as swiftly. And then, the reset. Each death taught him something new. He learned the hard way that no matter how he tried to evade it, death was inevitable, always lurking just around the corner. Sometimes it was quick, merciful, other times it was slow and excruciating. But no matter what, it always ended with him back in his bed, staring at the clock, knowing he was trapped in an endless loop, days blended together, each one a reflection of the last. Robert found himself growing desperate, frantic even. He stopped going to work, stopped seeing friends, trying instead to unravel the mystery of his torment. His apartment became a war zone, with maps, notes, and pictures plastered across the walls. He tracked every moment, every interaction, seeking some pattern, some clue to break the cycle. It was during one of these frantic scribbling sessions that he noticed something, a tiny, almost imperceptible difference. In the corner of his living room, where nothing but dust and forgotten things usually gathered, there was a small object. He didn't know how he hadn't seen it before. It was a metallic box, ancient in design, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Robert approached it cautiously, his heart thudding in his chest. The box was cool to the touch, humming with an energy that seemed to vibrate through his bones. He knelt down, his fingers tracing the strange symbols that adorned its surface. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before, alien, otherworldly. His breath caught in his throat as the box began to glow faintly. It opened with a soft click, revealing a small, pulsating crystal inside. The crystal's light seemed to dance, casting eerie shadows across the room. Robert's hand trembled as he reached out to touch it, a voice in the back of his mind screaming at him to stop, but his curiosity was overpowering. The moment his fingers brushed the crystal, a surge of electricity shot through him. His vision blurred, and he was suddenly somewhere else, somewhere vast, incomprehensible. He floated in a sea of stars, surrounded by swirling galaxies and nebulas that stretched out infinitely in every direction. The crystal pulsed in his hand, resonating with a rhythm that matched the beat of his heart. He realized then that this artifact, this crystal, was the key. It was the source of the time loop, the reason for his endless suffering. But why? What was its purpose? As if in response to his thoughts, the space around him shifted, and he was suddenly standing on a barren, alien landscape. Towering structures, ancient and monolithic, loomed in the distance, their surfaces covered in the same strange symbols as the box. Robert's mind struggled to comprehend the enormity of what he was seeing. This was not Earth, not even close. The air was thick with a metallic taste, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds shot through with lightning. The ground beneath his feet was cold, unyielding, and he could feel the vibrations of some immense power coursing through it. He walked forward, drawn toward the structures, the crystal in his hand guiding him. As he approached, the symbols on the structures began to glow, matching the rhythm of the crystal. He could feel something, a presence, ancient and vast, watching him, evaluating him. It was then that he understood, this was a test, a trial set by some unknown intelligence far beyond his understanding. The realization sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't just trapped in a loop, he was part of an experiment, a cosmic game where the stakes were his sanity, his life, and perhaps the fate of his entire existence. The crystal was the key to it all, but how to use it, how to break free, remained a mystery. Robert spent what felt like eons in that place, though it could have been mere moments. Time had no meaning here, just as it had none in his looping reality. He explored the structures, deciphering the symbols as best he could, piecing together fragments of knowledge that hinted at the crystal's true purpose. It was a device, a relic of an ancient civilization, created to manipulate time and space. But it had gone wrong, or perhaps it was working as intended. Robert couldn't be sure. As he delved deeper into the alien ruins, he encountered visions, flashes of other lives, other realities. In each one, he was different, yet the same. The faces changed, the places shifted, but the essence remained. He was a warrior in one life, a scholar in another, a wanderer in yet another. And in each of these lives, the crystal was there, always present, always guiding him. He began to understand that the crystal was not just an artifact, it was a conduit, a link between him and something greater, something far beyond the scope of human comprehension. It was not just testing him, it was trying to show him something, to teach him. But the lessons were painful, the knowledge hard-earned through suffering and loss. In one vision, he saw himself standing at the edge of a vast abyss, the crystal hovering before him like a beacon. He knew that to end the loop, to break free, he would have to make a choice, a sacrifice. The crystal's energy pulsed with an intensity that made his heart race. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him, the enormity of what was at stake. Robert knew then that he had to destroy the crystal, to sever the link and end the cycle. But to do so would mean risking everything, the collapse of time itself, the unraveling of the very fabric of reality. The thought terrified him, but he knew there was no other way. He had to take the risk, to face the unknown. With a final breath, Robert summoned all his strength, focusing on the crystal with a clarity that he had never felt before. He willed it to shatter, to break apart and release him from its grip. The crystal pulsed one last time, then began to crack, light spilling from its surface in blinding rays. The ground shook beneath him, the structures around him crumbling into dust. The sky tore open, and reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Robert felt himself being pulled apart, his consciousness unraveling as the crystal shattered into a million pieces. And then, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just an endless void. He awoke to silence. For a moment, he feared that he was still trapped, that the loop had merely reset once more. But as he opened his eyes, he realized he was no longer in his bed, no longer bound by the confines of the loop. He was free. The room around him was unfamiliar, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The air was crisp, the scent of pine trees wafting through an open window. He sat up slowly, his body aching as if he had been through a great ordeal. And perhaps he had, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Robert smiled. He had done it. He had broken the cycle, shattered the crystal, and freed himself from the endless torment. But as he stood up and gazed out the window, a small, nagging doubt crept into his mind. Was he truly free? Or was this just another layer of the loop, a deeper level of the game he had yet to understand? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he shook it off. It didn't matter. For now, he was free, and that was enough. As the sun rose, casting golden rays across the landscape, Robert took a deep breath and stepped outside, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited him. He had survived the loop, overcome the trials, and earned his freedom. But the universe was vast, and its mysteries endless. And deep down, he knew that his journey was far from over. Robert took in the crisp morning air, his senses heightened after what felt like a lifetime trapped in the loop. Each breath was a reminder that he was no longer bound by the relentless cycle of death and rebirth. The pine trees stood tall around the cabin he found himself in, their needles glistening with dew in the early light. The scene was peaceful, serene, a stark contrast to the chaos and despair he had left behind, yet, as much as he tried to immerse himself in the tranquility, a sense of unease gnawed at him. The doubts from earlier still lingered. Had he truly escaped, or was this just another layer, another trick of the crystal? The memory of the artifact's destruction was vivid in his mind, the way it had shattered into 1,000 fragments, light pouring out as reality itself seemed to collapse around him. And yet, here he was, in a place that was unfamiliar yet welcoming, as if the universe had decided to give him a respite. He stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his weight. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant gurgle of a stream. It was the kind of place he might have sought out for a vacation, a retreat from the pressures of daily life. But Robert knew better than to trust appearances. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Walking down the steps, he followed a narrow path that led into the woods. The air was filled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil, grounding him in the moment. He tried to focus on the simple pleasures, the feel of the dirt beneath his boots, the play of sunlight filtering through the canopy above. But his mind kept drifting back to the crystal, the strange visions he had experienced in that alien landscape, and the nagging feeling that his ordeal wasn't truly over. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser, their branches intertwining above like a woven ceiling. Robert's thoughts wandered to the countless lives he had glimpsed through the crystal's power, lives where he was different yet fundamentally the same. What connected them? Was there a greater purpose behind it all, or was it simply the cruel whim of some cosmic entity? He pushed the thoughts aside as he came to a clearing, where a small stream cut through the forest. Kneeling by the water's edge, Robert cupped his hands and took a drink. The water was cold and refreshing, a sharp contrast to the dry, metallic taste that still lingered in his mouth from the alien ruins. As he splashed his face, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rippling water. His face was worn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was something else there too. Determination. The will to keep going, no matter what. Standing up, he looked around, trying to get his bearings. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly in every direction, the trees standing like silent sentinels. There was no sign of civilization, no hint of where he might be or how far he had traveled. The thought was both freeing and terrifying. For the first time in a long while, he was truly alone, with no one to rely on but himself. As he continued along the stream, Robert noticed something strange, an object caught in the branches of a fallen tree. It was metallic, glinting in the sunlight, partially covered by leaves and dirt. His heart skipped a beat. Was it another artifact, another piece of the puzzle he had unwittingly become a part of? He carefully approached the object, his instincts on high alert. It was a small, cylindrical device, about the size of a flashlight, with strange markings etched along its surface, markings that bore a striking resemblance to those on the crystal box. Robert's breath caught in his throat as he reached out to touch it, half expecting another surge of energy or a vision to overwhelm him. But nothing happened. Picking up the device, he examined it closely. It was cold to the touch, heavier than it looked, and seemed to hum with a faint energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was a button on one end, and after a moment's hesitation, Robert pressed it, the device emitted a low whirring sound, and a holographic display flickered to life above it. Symbols and numbers he couldn't comprehend scrolled across the screen, and then it stabilized, projecting a 3D image of what appeared to be a map. Robert's eyes widened as he realized it wasn't just any map, it was a star map, with a series of coordinates highlighted in glowing blue. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of it. Was this the next step? Another clue left behind by the ancient civilization, or perhaps by the very beings that had created the crystal? The map shifted, zooming in on a particular region of space, and Robert felt a jolt of recognition. He didn't know how or why, but he knew that place. It was as if the knowledge had been planted in his mind, waiting to be unlocked at the right moment. The coordinates pointed to a distant star system, far beyond anything he had ever imagined, but there was a familiarity to it that he couldn't shake. As the hologram faded, Robert pocketed the device, his mind racing. This was it, his next move. Whatever answers he sought, they lay out there, beyond the stars. The thought filled him with a strange mix of fear and excitement. He had already faced death countless times, confronted the very fabric of reality, and yet the universe still held secrets he had barely begun to uncover. He turned back towards the cabin, his mind already planning the journey ahead. There was no telling what he would find out there, or if he would ever return. But one thing was certain, he couldn't stop now. The loop might be broken, but his path was far from clear. The universe, with all its mysteries and dangers, was calling to him, and he would answer. As Robert prepared to leave, he took one last look at the peaceful forest, a fleeting moment of calm before the storm. The road ahead was uncertain, and the dangers were likely far greater than anything he had faced before. But he was ready. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever truths he would uncover, he knew he would face them head-on. He had come too far to turn back now. With a determined stride, he set off, leaving the forest behind as he embarked on a journey that would take him to the farthest reaches of the cosmos. And though the future was uncertain, Robert knew one thing for sure: he would keep moving forward, no matter what. The universe had its plans, but so did he.